There's a funny question that I ask. My team also have a structured set of questions, but I'm notorious in coming in like the second or third interview and throwing some left field questions, get them to speak openly. So a couple of questions that I ask is like, teach me something new, right? Within 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
And also smile. You're building a rapport with your
Right.
interviewer, right? You want the interviewer to feel, hey, I would love to solve problems with this guy or this girl, right? Um, Welcome to our Tech Chronicles podcast. Today's episode is going to be a fun one. It is about how you're going to ace that tech interview. We're going to start off with discussing the perspectives of the interviewer, what they're looking for. So it sets the stage. And then we'll move on to the interviewee. How would you prepare? How do you actually conduct the interview? And then what can you do after the interview? Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Maybe we start off with the interviewer's perspective. Who wants to kick us off?
Go first. I've been on both sides of the table or the camera in technical interviews as well as more business oriented. But lately, I've been interviewing from a business angle. I could give you some examples that I look for. Things like one of the main thing for me is curiosity. So I look for curiosity in the candidates, especially what questions they ask me. Because towards the end, sometimes they just don't ask any questions at all. That's a red flag for me.
That's a good one. Maybe I can go next. Sure. For me personally, for a tech interview, I want to know that they have good fundamentals, right? Secondly, what is important to me is problem solving skills, because that's what they're going to do every day. Third part is probably creativity. How can they think out of the box?
Yeah, definitely overlaps with few things that Shan and Roshan just mentioned. One of the key things I always look for is that how do they approach each question? What is that thought
Mm.
process? Like, what are they thinking on how to craft that answer? How do they structure it? Is there sometimes like if there's some kind of like a clarity that requires like you kind of play it back? For me, one of the main things is like the whole approach in answering a question.
And tagging from there, I was thinking along when I ask about their past experience, I look for how much work they've that coincides with the company's interest, and also I look for how they describe the problem, because sometimes they go straight into the tech stack they used and how they did it, but they don't explain what the problem is. So that makes me think that they are a bigger picture people.
That's spot on. Um, Another aspect I would say is yes, they could be technically brilliant, but are they a cultural fit to my team, to our company? Thinking out aloud, just having been part of interviews too. We don't do this, but I've also seen some companies, the interviewer makes the interviewee feel a little bit uncomfortable purposely, just to see how they get very defensive, how they react, because sometimes in the work environment things get pretty stressful. So they want to test that out as well. Have you seen that?
Yeah, definitely. Like you kind of purposely show that you're trying to challenge just to see what kind of reaction you get, and it's not in a bad way.
Mm.
It actually gives the interviewer or like the organization like a true sense, to Roshan's point, like how do they handle like a situation, because whether we like it or not, everyone has to go through that in a real life situation.
Cool. Let's switch gears to now help candidates, interviewees prepare first. But before we go, I want to say I'm so glad Yuresh has joined me. It's nice to do this together.
This is not a glitch. Like we are part
We're
of like the
actually here.
same view.
That's pretty awesome. And so maybe one day we'll come over and visit you, Sean, and we'll do a podcast together as well.
I feel lonely here. Come on, guys.
All right. Pre-interview. So preparation. Very important step. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
What kind of advice would you share candidates and how to prepare.
I can take a couple of things that I normally do. One thing is for sure, like, know the company you're interviewing for, right? Like, you don't need to go into like financial reports and like some obscene amount of like information to know about the company in and out. But you should at a minimum learn like what they do at a high level. How does like your interest area kind of fits in? Because sometimes like when you apply for a job, like you kind of look at like the job description and you don't like think beyond that, like, is this company like really like a good match for me or would be like a good match for me? That's one thing. And also, like, since I mentioned like the job role, know about the job role, kind of like the language within the job role, the job description rather, pretty well. Because that way, like when you answer questions, when you are talking about yourself, you can relate to some of those job description as part of like your answers.
I would go a little bit further to look back at your resume and try to highlight areas that you want to elevate in your pitch, basically trying to sell yourself in that environment. So highlight and kind of have a mental prepare. Don't memorize, but try to highlight areas that you worked in the past that the company might find interesting. Even if you don't have it, you can probably bring up saying, I'm interested in these areas, uh, because your company works in that environment.
Just to continue on the resume topic, Shan, that's so important because that is the thing that represents you and creates some
Right.
interest. I've noticed a lot of people just jot down the things they did on the resume. And when you are looking through like 100 resumes, if you're on the other side as an interviewer or a recruiter, you need to stand out, right? So a thing that I've noticed work really well is this. There are two things. One is called the STAR and one is called SBI. I like SBI. It's simple. SBI is situation, behavior, impact. So if you're describing a line item, what was the situation, why you had to do it? Behavior, what is the behavior you performed or did or exhibited? What is the impact that delivered? Performance improvement, high scalability, or you unlocked some massive customer value or revenue, something like that. For if you can follow that SBI method
Right.
and write your resume, it lot more. It stands out a lot more.
Yeah, just definitely. I have used both STAR and SPI approaches, and also I think just to build upon like some of the things we talked about earlier, instead of you kind of mentioning, and we'll cover some of this like during like what you should do like during the interview too. Instead of listing things like what you have done versus saying it in a different way, like because you did this, like it impacted like this area of the business or it generated x amount of revenue, whatever that metric might be, always try to associate that as part of like your preparation. Because some of these things, like I have had like this has happened to me a couple of times, which is why I know if you don't prepare for this, you can easily forget. Like you sometimes like might forget like what was that number, what was that percentage, what was that dollar amount, whatever that might be. So it is very important that like you kind of like prepare for kind of figure that out during your preparation time.
And one more item, I think this is probably more suited for you in a more deep technology side. In some of the interviews that we noticed that candidates did not prepare to have a IDE open, right? Because there are questions that are interactive saying, use your favorite IDE to solve the problem, and they were not prepared. So we waste about 10, 15 minutes right there.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, try and just be over prepared as much as possible. I would agree. Another thing I would say is you know for a fact that the interview will start off by saying, "Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself." So if you can nail that personal elevator
Narrative.
pitch and just be very crisp about it,
Yeah,
it goes a long way.
right. Like leave it to try to maintain it to like about 2 minutes. Like that's what a lot of people recommend. And also, I have heard through like a lot of public speakers that you should try to, again, like this is just one approach, try to structure it to what you do now, then go to the past, and then go to the future. Right. So you start off saying that this is what I'm doing right now, this is what I have done in the past, and this is what I want to do in the future.
Yeah, and last one probably from me is that those who don't have a lot of experience to speak to, right? You may have done a lot of personal research and you even worked on hobbies. That's perfectly fine if you can package it and explain it in those areas that you think the company would find useful. Prepare for it.
Yeah, very good. I would add one more tiny thing, especially to your point, Sean, about not being ready with an IDE, for example. I would say if the company or the recruiter haven't already given you an idea of the format of the interview, reach out and ask. It shows interest, right? That goes a long way. It shows something about the candidate.
But not least, it's funny one. Sleep well. Sleep well in the previous night, because the last thing you want is stressed and sleep deprived with a dark circle coming into a call.
So you cannot look like hungover. Hey, a quick message to our viewers. If you like these types of conversations and episodes, please like us and like follow us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe right now.
So that takes us then to the interview itself, right? Maybe I can start, right? Especially for the tech interview, you can be sure you're going to be given some coding problem, right? And so I should have said this in the pre part as well. There are so many resources nowadays like Lead Code and HackerRank and whatnot. Spend some time just doing some example problems. You might not get one of those, but at least you get, in the groove and, get a little, you're informed, right? So be prepared to code. So that's the interview. And while you're coding, what is important there is think out loud. Talk about why you're doing this. Just over explain actually, so that the interviewer knows how you're thinking, how you're approaching this problem, and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's the same way like you do like a math test or something like that. Like just writing like the final answer would not get you anywhere. Like you have to kind of list the steps. So think, explain your thought process. It goes back to one of the points we mentioned around like the preparation too.
And just to add to the coding part, right? It is an interview. It is hard. And you might not get it right. It's okay, right? Nobody is going to discount you just because you didn't get the right solution or your code had some bugs. This is an opportunity to show the interviewer how you're going to debug your code, walk it through, test it out, use some test values, and figure out are you able to debug this and figure it out. You may get to the right solution, you may not, but at least you've given a lot of signal to the interviewer.
And also keep your answers succinct and to the point, because a lot of interviews, like the interviewers wear out if the candidate keeps on going and not going. Sometimes if you're self-doubting whether you've spoken too much or not, just ask the interviewer, like, do you want a deep dive in this area? I can.
Right.
And get the feedback.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I have a different point too. But just to add upon like what Sean just said, if you feel that like you went off rails, like off track, just say it, right? That's fine. Like just reset the conversation, like or start like saying, let me rephrase that. Let me explain it in a different way. Find like some way like to kind of so that like you kind of show like you are really thinking through like your answers rather than like just saying stuff out loud. Just on the tardiness, I would also say try to keep eye contact. Right?
Another thing also is ask questions. Just because they give you the problem doesn't mean
Right.
probably they've given you the full problem also.
Yes.
So don't, just because you get the problem, don't start writing code. Ask follow-up questions. Get a little bit more deeper. Sometimes they might give you hints, right? So I like that when like you mentioned curiosity, Shah, that shows curiosity for the problem, right? And yeah, the thing you should not do is quietly start coding.
Right.
Nobody wants that. Talk about it. Say, okay, here's how I think I should solve this. What do you think? Maybe go through some examples. Now let's write code, right? Another thing maybe is, so another type of interview in the tech, for a tech interview, is the design question. This is where they test your problem solving, creativity side, right? How would you approach those?
So to your question, you said design question, right, Rashan? Yeah. So design question requires a lot of knowledge as to what the company's challenges are. So going back to asking questions interactively, and also something I noticed very interesting is that whenever I notice the candidate takes a pen and pencil and asks permission, can I take notes? I find it very interesting because it shows how attentive and detailed they are. And so I suggest the same technique, like you take notes with permission. Do not type it, because if you start typing, they think you're Googling. So take note with a piece of paper and pencil, and then circle back with questions later on, because sometimes that moment may not be right moment to ask the question.
Sean, that's a great point because you know what? That gives the interviewer a glimpse into how this person would be at meetings.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
A
Yeah.
really good one. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Coming back to design, for me, I would say is so sometimes you're given a vague design problem, right? This is your opportunity to show how you take a vague, big problem and break it down into small pieces. And then you start tackling those small pieces. Because sometimes it's vague and you don't know where to start. Ask questions and break it down. That's a tip that really helps.
So yeah, the question serves two purposes actually, right? Like one is to obviously understand the question better. If you have the choice, I think you should also kind of look to defining parameters around it. You're kind of restating like what was just discussed, right? Like, and these are like the extra information I just got, and here are like the some of the parameters we would stick to in the design, and that kind of applies like to the coding part too. Like, more structure you put in, the more thought you put in, the more you communicate, it's better basically.
And also, show off your theoretical knowledge. Talk about cap theorem. Talk about how you maybe you come up with a simple solution, but this is how I would scale it.
Right.
This is how I'm going to make this more resilient. These are the failure points. You can talk about them, and if they are really interesting, sometimes the interviewer might say, "Okay, let's dig into that a little bit more." But don't not say it, right? Just talk about it, and that goes a long way. Do you want to talk about sometimes some companies really throw these curveballs, right? Googlies. How would you tackle?
So you, I guess, like as I'm saying this, like I'm doing the same thing, like part of like conversation fillers too, right? I think it is okay to just ask for like a little bit of time to like collect your thoughts. If you want to take like about 15-20 seconds to kind of collect your thoughts on how to kind of, how do you even answer some questions? What the interviewer is looking for is more than like an actual textbook definition, like how you like scenario like that, like how do you kind of try to answer this. How does your mind work? So I think showcase that, right? And then like once you kind of start thinking like that, then it'll organically start coming to you like, okay, like these are the questions I should ask, like these are some of the clarifications I need, or the answer to it itself.
Yeah, that's a good question, and good points, Yuresh. I was going to say the same thing. Like buy time using multiple ways. One way is to basically reiterate or rephrase how you understood the question. That gives you a little bit of time, and it's perfectly okay to pause for a while instead of just using filler words to get your thoughts in. And sometimes the googlies are given or the curveball questions are passed because they also wanted to understand how honest you are. If you haven't faced that problem, do you kind of throw some garbage at them, or do you honestly come back and say, "Hey, I haven't had that situation. I'm curious. I might do this." Something you can make up after you say you haven't come up with that situation.
I think, every interview is different, but from what I've seen, they just want to know if you're willing to try, right? And you can ask more questions. And generally, good interviewers, they don't want you to fail. They don't want you to have like a very negative experience. They might help you along the way. They'll nudge you or they'll ask you questions to steer you in a way of, hopefully unlocking that first hurdle and then going on your way. So it depends on the interviewer, but generally good ones make it a very positive experience.
And Roshan, one more thing, like I've noticed sometimes the candidates succeed by asking, instead of asking questions, they make assumptions, saying that for this problem, I assume it's this, I assume it's that. Then that kind of gives them like idea, wow, this guy is thinking about other areas, or this gal, right? I think that that's useful as well.
So just to summarize though, like you mentioned a lot of good things, right? Definitely, a big pro tip is when they give you a design question, especially a design question, jot down the requirements and ask follow up questions. Think about non functional requirements too. Jot them down. If it's a board or whatever, do that. And then, like you said, state your assumptions. Write them down so it's
Right.
visible and everyone knows These are parameters, right? So you work around that. Good. Anything else on that? Yeah, there's another type of interview that happens during the interview. So we talked about coding, we talked about design. My company, and I know a lot of other companies, also do this like values or cultural fit type of questions, right? So for those, I would say this is where the preparation comes. Think about past projects you've done and be able to articulate it really well of how you executed with the other your team members. Think about ways where you lifted another team member up or gave good constructive feedback, right? Or you shared knowledge. These are all plus points.
Yeah.
So
That's the time to shine on. Like everything, all the aces that you have achieved in the past, bring them up like in a more structured, creative, or a constructive way rather.
and also smile, right? You're building a rapport with your interviewer, right? You want the interviewer to feel, hey, I would love to solve problems with this guy or this girl, right? So make it an enjoyable experience, and we don't give fake smiles.
Culture fit, one item I can say is interviewers love stories as long as it's short, right? So come prepared with a realistic, I mean, real story that you can share, with a smile saying, hey, this situation happened to me, and this is how I tackled it, and make it specific instead of generic saying I helped out 5 teams to achieve a goal.
That was the value, like, right? Yeah, because like you shouldn't let the interview think, okay, you did that, so
So
what?
what? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so what?
Yeah. And also remember, start with the why first. This is the problem. I did this, and this is the value, right? Good points. Should want to talk a little bit about what happens after the interview? What can you do? Let's say it went well. Let's say it didn't go well. What are your options?
I can take that first. So, in my experience, like if, after every interview, whether it went right or wrong, right or like it could have gone better, I think everyone feels like that it could have gone better to a certain extent. I always follow up with whoever your contact person is, right? If it is just to say like, hey, like just to say thank you, or like kind of say like your side of like how the interview went, right? Like just give some feedback. This is how I think it went, and kind of like taking that to the next level. If you did not think that it went well, or like if you think that it could have gone better, you could either kind of be, rather than like being more generic, like be more specific about something, or if you want to kind of reach out to like one of the interviewers, like mention that person by the name and say that like, hey, this but part of the question, now that like I put more thought to it, like if I was given another opportunity, I would have answered it like in this manner, or like I would like to add to my previous answer or something like that, just to show that like you are thorough with like your process. You really into this. You really want to make this work. It shows a lot, like that whatever that follow up might be.
I myself have actually done that, right? Where I after the interview I realized I messed it up, the coding question, and sometimes it's on your mind, and you're going through the other interviews, it's still on your mind, right? And so when I finished, I just sat down and I started coding it again, rethinking the whole thing, and I reached out to the recruiter and I said, okay, hey, can you share this with so and so? I think I made a mistake. I don't know whether it counts, but I want to just let them know that I know how to solve this.
Right.
And I sent it over. So one thing about that is don't wait a day. Do it as
Right.
soon as you can.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
essentially that.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, good.
Now, I was going to say that's a great point. Like, there were very few who gotten back, but it shows how interested they are in the job and how they understood the problem. Just wanted to add one thing I forgot to mention earlier. Like just before wrapping up the call, you have to show excitement and how happy you are to join if you get a chance, so that you can follow up with an email, like to Uresh's point, reach out to the recruiter, who, if you have a chance to send a message to your interviewer, just say how pleasant it was and how you enjoy the conversation. And then the last part for me is like reflect. Just spend some time to reflect how you could have improved that conversation. For me, every interview that I attended always improved me to a point that I was excited to go to interviews. Like I wanted to have the chance to showcase what I can do.
I would like another thing I have done. I mean, sometimes it depends on the company. Even the recruiters get super busy, right? And not to be a nuisance, but like do some frequent follow-ups. Like if you have not heard from them in days, I wouldn't recommend like writing to them like every day. But if you have not heard back in a few days, just like write and follow up, say that like, hey, like eager to kind of find out like about the next steps, how the interview went, or whatever that next step might be, right? That shows that you are still interested.
That's a great point. I work with a few recruiters who sometimes gotten back to me because they get very busy, right? But they've sometimes gotten back saying, "Hey, what do you think about this candidate?" Because he or she reached out to me and very interested to know. Then that kind of rekindles or bring them on top. So yeah, definitely do that.
Excellent point, Sean. I sometimes the recruiter sends us a note saying it's and says, okay, thanks so and so. I enjoy this. It's like very personalized
Right.
notes for each interviewer,
Right.
and that definitely bumps them up,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a good one. I missed saying this during the interview part. Generally, at the end of the interviewer asks you, do you have any questions for me? So do your homework, like we talked about, and have good, interesting questions to ask them because it also shows curiosity,
Yeah.
interest, right? And whatnot. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Roshan. One of the things I have done, and again, it kind of depends on what type of level that you're interviewing for, right? If it is somewhat like medium to like, kind of like a more senior role, one of the things I always ask is that like, what are the top three things you are trying to resolve, right? It kind of in a way like it has like a dual purpose, like it shows that like you're interested, and also like it is actually like a really good way to like kind of find out what you're about to walk into, like if you do get the job, right? Or like just like along those lines. So there's definitely like ask about the company, ask about like what are the plans for like the next 3 years, so you can get like a good sense of like what that where the company is going.
Any closing remarks? Or
Can we go through a round of like interesting questions to wrap up? What is your favorite question?
One of the things I always ask, whether it has like a more structured approach or not, part of the interview process, I would always ask a candidate, tell me about like one of the high points in your career and like one of the low points, just to kind of get an idea around like what type of things they have gone through, how they overcame it, or like how they celebrated it, whatever that might be, right? I kind of use that as like a baseline, so that like if I'm interviewing multiple people for like the same role or something, that's one of the baseline questions I always ask.
That's a good point. There's a funny question that I ask. I mean, my team also have a structured set of questions, but I'm notorious in coming in like the second or third interview and throwing some left field questions just to, get them to speak openly. So a couple of questions that I ask is like, teach me something new, right? Within 2 minutes or 3 minutes and see, I mean, serves a multiple purpose. Like, what are they working on? Are they curious? Are they up to date? And the other question I ask is if money is not a problem, what job would you do? It's not my question. I've learned from somewhere else. But that basically brings up a good angle as to who they are.
what? Having listened to this conversation, I feel we should also have an episode that discusses how to conduct an interview and how to write and all that kind of stuff. So we spent a lot of time talking about the interviewee side. Maybe there's value in interview being an interviewer and how do you conduct a good interview. Let's see what our viewers think in the comments.